Well, hello everybody. It's Dan here again, managing partner of Infotex, and this is our fourth You Spoke, We Listened of the year. Kind of turns out we're doing them quarterly. And so, first of all, we've got people asking us to keep up the live webinars. We did a few live webinars in the spring, and then kind of started doing some reruns, doing some movies and stuff. And we had people say, "Hey, what happened to the live webinars?" And so we just did one on our technology planning webinar in October. It went really well. Meanwhile, the October webinar was about technology planning, and one of the things we always release in the technology planning webinar is a tactical plan alternative spreadsheet, which is a compilation of all the takeaways we've noted at bank or credit union security conferences. And then we make that available as part of our technology planning to help people kind of, brainstorm what, kind of get a feel for what kind of new things are going to be coming down the road. And this year's, by the way, is very compliance oriented because the discussions that we were able to go to was a panel discussion of examiners. And so we will publish that. I'm actually going to write a short article, and so that's what the holdup is. But the person who's in charge of bugging me about that, Sarah, she brings the fun into the organization, and part of that is making sure I get that article written. And she's assured me that I'm going to be done writing it by the end of next week. Meanwhile, we have had a lot of people say, "Hey, we love the vendor management movies that you have on the website, but they're really meant more for, the drill down." They're really meant for people that are really trying to get into the weeds of vendor management. And so we have a 2-hour contract review webinar out there. If you want to know about how to review a contract, watch that. More importantly, we're reviewing the Infotex contract in that webinar. So if you're already having to review our contract, just so you know, watch that webinar and you'll see what is missing in our contract. And then, of course, you're going to have to risk rank that and get back to us, right? But what we decided to do was to really kind of rearrange all of our vendor management presentations. We do need one on the basics and just kind of a high-level introduction to vendor management. But then we're going to break up the assurance review, the insurance review, the contract review. We'll break that 2-hour movie. Well, for one, we're going to redo it, try to make it shorter, but we're going to make it, more reasonable to watch. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a playlist, and we're really kind of getting into these playlists on YouTube where you can watch a playlist and it'll give you everything you need to know about a particular subject, in this case, vendor management. And so our goal is to try to have that available by April of 2021. And so if you're just really tired of vendor management and you want to delegate it to somebody, in April of 2021, they'll be able to watch a series of about 5 movies. And by the way, the 5th movie is business continuity planning, how to review a vendor's business continuity plan. And then it'll actually be a summary of the playlist. Finally, this last one, I'm starting to feel like I'm being picked on here, but there's a 2-part to it. In our last You Spoke, We Listened, somebody had asked, can Dan learn to play something besides the harmonica? I guess we're getting tired of Dan playing the harmonica, right? And my You Spoke, We Listened. And so the last time I played the flute in July, I thought that was, pretty good. I learned how to play a little Aboriginal flute. And so the next You Spoke, We Listened, can Dan learn how to play that flute better? And so I hope that this is better.
Our lawyers want you to know that when you attend any of our webinars or watch any of our movies, you're agreeing to the terms of service located at the link on the screen. We're also required to provide this abbreviation of what our terms of service include. The main point we need to get across is that regulations change on a regular basis, and we want you to know that what we present can sometimes be very time-dated information or our own interpretation of new guidance or regulations. The materials we present today are subject to change. Also, whenever we provide free boilerplates as part of our webinars or movies, we're required to point out our transfer of copyright agreement, which is also located on our website in our IT resources library. You can read it by going to the link on the screen. Please also note, by attending an Infotext webinar or by receiving any Infotext movie, you may be added to our mailing list. We apologize if you'd rather not receive notice of other free education. You can always opt out at the link on the screen. And now, it is our pleasure to introduce to you our webinar moderator, the code curator and special envoy from the SEAM, Michael Hartke.
Hello everybody, my name is Michael Hartke. I'm the curator of code here at Infotext and your moderator. Welcome and thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them as you see pictured here. We will make sure they get answered. We'd like to point out destinations on our website, webinars.infotext.com, where you can find our upcoming webinar topics and event schedule, and then also movies.infotext.com, where you can find the movies of these webinars and training videos. And now, I'd like to introduce the speaker of today's event, the awareness guru from Indiana, the breaker of tech and enforcer of policy. He has 13 letters after his name, and they all spell risk management. Dan Hadaway. Dan?
Hello, my name is Dan Hadaway and I'm the managing partner of Infotext, a managed security operations center. We watch Bank and Credit Union Network. I'm really glad and quite frankly honored to work with the cybersecurity superheroes of the bank, which are the information security people in your bank. And we consider them to be superheroes because they do so much with so little. And I'm here to help them reach out to the board of directors to provide what we call cybersecurity awareness training. And I do this in two different approaches. A, just kind of helping you understand the board's role in cybersecurity, and that changes from time to time. But then B, to help you understand what your small bank information security officer is typically going to face in the year 2021. And then we'll kind of talk a little bit about how you can apply your role towards helping your information security officer wrestle with the top risks that a community-based bank faces in 2021. And so how can you apply your role to help manage risk? Well, that in itself, that effort helps manage risk. And so I like to use the metaphor of the canary in the coal mine. And I'm hoping that everybody remembers that if a canary gets sick in a coal mine, that's probably because the canary has breathed too much methane gas, which means we better get the heck out of the coal mine, right? And so if you think about the agenda, the whole notion of what is your role, well, your role is to make sure that with all the effort we've placed on putting canaries in our coal mine, are we taking the time to check them birds, right? And then what can make them birds sick in 2021? Well, that's the top 7 risks is what I call them, R7. And I make a list of the top 7 risks every year, and that's what can make your canary sick in your coal mine. And then finally, how can you help manage that risk? What is your role? And I'm going to start right out and dive right into the role of a board of directors. Now, there was a time when there was no guidance in terms of what the director's role should be related to cyber risk. And so back in the early days of our company, we still found ourselves talking to directors on a regular basis, as part of an audit or because there was a breach. Or the first time I spoke to a board of directors, it was because one of our partners at Infotext was on the board of a de novo bank. And so we went in before they even opened their doors and talked to them about information security. And since there was no guidance back in those days, we would come in with the 3 goals of information security. We call it CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, it didn't take us long to realize that we needed to add legal and compliance risk and reputational risk to that equation. And then what we would do is we'd help the board understand the goals of information security, and we try to get them to see what they should be looking for to make sure that management is pursuing those goals, ranging from, policies and procedures in the IT governance program, all the way through IT audits and, tabletop test results and that sort of thing. But you know what? That all was rather complicated, especially back in those days when not a lot of people were even on the internet, right? And so let's just cross that off and let's simplify that. We eventually ended up saying, look, those 5 goals are great, but suffice it to say, your role is to always remind management that what those 5 goals are about is protecting our customers. Then finally, in the year 2006, the FFIEC released their guidance called the Information Security Handbook that actually had some articulation in terms of what the board of directors' role was when it came to information security. It didn't call it cybersecurity back then. We called it information security, and so we kind of took to saying, hey, you have 2 roles. One is to look backwards and look at the vendor risk reports and the IT audits and the annual report to the board, and then the second role was to help the management team look forwards and approve the policies that they wanted you to approve and understand the results of your risk assessment, et cetera. And then I took the crossing this off the list and saying, hey, you know what? Someone on your team should probably understand all this, but we're not going to get all of you to do this. I mean, if you really want to know what your role is, it's to remind our management team that they need to make sure we're protecting our customers, that it's really all about protecting our customers. And then, nothing happened really to more articulate the board's role until 2015, when new guidance was released, a cybersecurity assessment tool. And part of that related to the board was you needed to, update a risk appetite statement on a regular basis. You've probably done that. If you haven't, you might want to ask your information security officer why you haven't. But even that's great. In the pandemic, one of the silver linings in the clouds, right, that I see in the pandemic is that everybody now knows what we mean by risk appetite, right? That's kind of what the pandemic did for us. But in terms of your role as the board, it's good that the board understands whether you want to have a low risk appetite or a high risk appetite or whatever when it comes to cybersecurity. And we can get granular on that. We can say, hey, you want to have one risk appetite for ransomware and another risk for other stuff or whatever. But that's nice and fine and dandy. And somebody on your team somebody on the board needs to start getting their arms around all this. But the average person on the board of directors, it's still about protecting your customer. Your role is to make sure that with all this other stuff we're doing, all this stuff here that I just went through, your role is to make sure that somebody is checking them birds. It's about making sure we don't have any sick birds. It's about making sure that we're protecting our customers. And so, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago when I started taking to defining your role that way, some board members, and back then I would actually be able to walk into a board meeting and present to them, but they would say, hey, that sounds all fine and dandy. I love it. I love the metaphor, but can you please give us some more articulation? Can you help us understand, where we should focus? And so 3 years ago, I maintain it still now, audit readiness, awareness training, and managing new risks. But this is what I'm going to talk about when I get to the how. How can you apply your role? But your role really is, are we checking them birds? Your role really is to ask questions. Your role is to make sure that we are ready for our audits, that we are making everybody aware of what they should be aware of, that we are managing the new risks. And so I want to talk to you about the new risks in 2021. What can make our birds sick in 2021? And this is a list that I write at the end of every year. And it's actually a part of an article that I publish for information security officers. And there's a lot of talking to my clients and attending conferences. I moderate 2 different conferences on cybersecurity. But suffice it to say, these risks down here, they're the same old risks. They've been on this list for years and years and years, these bottom 3, with one exception, the word fatigue, okay? The insider threat, it made it to the list number 7 last year. I'm raising it this year. I'll explain a little bit why. Cloud security, working from home. These 2 risks are really, they were, well, working from home wasn't, but cloud security was starting to make it to the list in 2020, but it got exacerbated by the fact that a lot of us are working from home now, and we don't see that ending too soon. And even after it ends, after we come out, after the pandemic's over or whatever, the cat's out of the bag. We've learned how to become more productive by working in the middle of the night. And then finally, ransomware. It's got everybody frightened. It's the number 1 risk for 2021 because it's exacerbated in the pandemic. Insiders can use it, and because we're all fatigued, we're more apt to end up with it. So I really don't want to teach you what ransomware is. If you don't know what it is now, you should be Googling it. You hit pause and Google it. We can move on. But suffice it to say, there's really good reasons why it is scaring the heck out of everybody because A, it's really profitable, and B, since it is so profitable, the bad guys are hiring people that are probably a lot smarter than I am to design malware that is just amazingly good malware, and they've got processes and systems centered around the fact that they're going to make some money off of you and your insurance company. Believe it or not, 2019, the average ransomware demand was $110,000. That's not what they'll demand out of you if you're a bank, by the way. They know who has the money, right? 2020, at least by the 3rd quarter, it had gone up to 170,000. That's because the pandemic makes it easier for people to just say, hey, insurance company, cough up the money. We're tired of the uncertainty, et cetera, et cetera. And if you guessed $170,000, you should get a prize from your information security officer. But the solution to ransomware is vulnerability management. And if you have not gotten your arms around vulnerability management from a high level, from a non-technical perspective, your information security officer needs your help. Every member of the board should understand vulnerability management at a high level, at a non-technical level. And we've made that easier for you. First of all, this right here is an article if you like reading, or if you want to take 30 minutes and watch a movie. This movie will really help you understand what you need to understand to help your management team and your information security officer and your IT people manage the risk of ransomware. So, put your time where your mouth is. If you really are worried about ransomware, spend 30 minutes and watch this movie. I'm moving on to the second. And this, again, is because of the pandemic. But I also want to make sure you understand, it's not like working from home is a higher risk or a lower risk than ransomware. This isn't a David Letterman list, or I would have started with number 7 and worked my way to number 1. Instead, these risks may or may not even apply to your bank. I would ask your information security officer if they do, because they will apply to your bank in degrees of relativity, both from an inherent risk perspective and a residual risk perspective. But suffice it to say, working from home has taken us all by surprise because we were totally and perfectly happy not setting up remote access for non-technical members of our team because we're a bank and we wanted to get people into the branch, right, or whatever. But we now have security risk and operational risk that we didn't have a year ago. This movie should apply clear through July, August, maybe even September of 2021 until the pandemic ends. And then hopefully, these risk profiles, these risk equations will change. But suffice it to say, the bad guys, they're also working from home. A lot of them are laid off or fired or mad. And so they're out on the dark web and learning how to break into banks. That's where the money is, right? Banks are pretty hardened, in my opinion, and I mean, in general. But where the real risk is now is with your customers, in my opinion. What you got to realize now that we're working from home is that the attack surface that the bad guys get to target is extremely larger than it was before. And you might not understand this diagram, but suffice it to say that until we get to where I just got, right, until this point, this is all new. This is now what's happening. Users are using their endpoints to go through their own Wi-Fi access point through the internet, through hopefully a very robust remote process that includes multi-factor authentication, but it then ends up going through the internet to the protected assets that is where they used to work. Okay, and the only risk back then was, hey, we got some cloud assets, and so we need to protect that because they're not actually on our network. They're in the cloud. But nowadays, those cloud access, by the way, can be accessed from home. We can bypass this really nice fancy system I just got done talking to you about with multi-factor authentication because we can access those cloud assets directly from home. Okay, just like, by the way, we could here, but at least here we had all kinds of controls in place to watch and that sort of thing. And so suffice it to say, and by the way, what do you mean by cloud assets? Well, there's a lot of websites that we visit now just to look into loans, right? There's a lot of websites that we visit to secure ourselves. There's websites we visit for training, et cetera. Those are cloud assets. And then we're doing a lot of web conferencing now, a lot more than we used to do before. So we need to have an approach to securing these endpoints that we never needed to have prior to working from home. So now that we're all working from home, endpoint security is really, really important. And unfortunately, most of the businesses in America are just pretending that they're securing their endpoints. Or maybe they're just sticking their head in the sand, I don't know, but they're not doing it. Now, you're a bank or a credit union, and so, examiners aren't going to let you pretend that you're doing something about endpoint security. And so, at a base level, you're at least doing some sort of manual auditing, where the IT person's checking the patch level of endpoints when they come back into the office, or, encouraging and cajoling management team members to do it on their own when they're at home, right? But what you're working for right now is to add endpoint security into your vulnerability management program, which I'm going to be talking to you about briefly as a part of this presentation. Down the road, and really it's probably 2 to 3 years down the road because we're still in the early adopter phase for the Fortune 1000 companies, right? So they're still spending a lot of money. It's still very expensive. But 2-3 years down the road, community-based banks and credit unions should be able to start affording endpoint security applications. So look for it to be a line item in a future budget. Another common question that we used to get, especially in March, April, May, June, we're not getting as much, but we watch networks. That's what Infotex does when that's what we do for money, right? And so we did have a lot of clients reach out and say, hey, my management team wants to know if you can tell us whether our people are working or not. Well, here's what we have to say about that, which is, hey, I know you can't see them at the bank, and so but when they were at the bank, you didn't ask us to monitor them then. Was it because you could see their screens? No, you saw them in the break area, you saw them in the parking lot, you saw them, in meetings, you interacted with them, right? That's how you knew they were working. But I'm here to tell you, they're working harder usually when they're working at home. And it's really about the results is what and it seems like banks have kind of figured that out on their own anyway. Yes, there are more distractions, but as we watch networks, we are noticing a lot more management team members logging in at night because they wake up, they're worried, they log in to check something, they go back to sleep or whatever. I'm telling you, your people are just as productive now as they ever were before. If you had issues before, you have issues now, but we really feel like they're bankers. And it's about the results. One of the nice things about being a bank is that your best practices oriented. To us, the better question is how do we know those people are secure? Because that's where, there's real risk, not productivity, but security. Everything I just finished saying. And what you have to realize is that, at the bank, we control the environment. I'm pretty sure, banks don't have the ability, or even if they had the gall or whatever, to send people into our management team members' homes to make sure that they're safe. But that's the question. It's not whether they're productive. It's are they safe? Are they safe at home? So the third risk is really one that has been exacerbated by the working from home reaction to the pandemic, but it was already on the list previously, and that's cloud security. And so cloud security was, sitting at number 7, number 6 last year, and it got shot way up to number 3 because of the fact that we're all working from home now, right? And I'm not going to bore you with all the details of the fact that we need to be careful what data we're putting in the cloud, to, we lose control of data when it goes into the cloud, to, configuration issues. Because as a director, I think the one thing you really can help with, the one thing that you should know is that management in your bank right now should be hunting down the, cloud assets and really kind of figuring out which cloud assets you're using, and then making sure that you've got multi-factor authentication on the way into the cloud assets. In other words, you remember the debit card, the ATM card for your bank. The reason why, we only need a 4-digit PIN on something that causes a machine to kick cash out for us is because what we have is the card and what we know is the PIN. And so that's 2 factors of authentication. That's why we don't need to use strong pins, right? Because with 2 factors of authentication, the security is so much better that we don't need strong pins. We need that on the websites that we log into where we're putting critical or confidential data. And so because of that, as a member of the board, where you can really help is by asking, do we have 2-factor authentication on all of our cloud assets, and encouraging management to make that so. It's usually, a lot of times it's free, because the people who are providing the cloud assets, they want you to be secure, right? But even when there is a cost to it, it's worth the cost, I'm here to tell you, because we've really kind of developed the phrase, 2-factor authentication is the hand sanitizer of cloud security. And now I'd just like to pause, mainly because that's what happens whenever I bring the next subject up. Whenever we try to raise the issue of the next subject, there's this awkward pause. There's this, crickets. And that was a pause on purpose too, okay? But what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce a photo metaphor of your team. They're taking a selfie, I guess. This is Joan Department. She's a multitasker. She has several different arms. And so, did you see how that guy kind of changed there? This dude up here? Yeah. The reason I needed to have an awkward pause is because whenever I bring up this subject, it seems like there's always an awkward pause. And that's probably because I'm bringing it up with usually IT people and not boards. I'm hoping that as a bank board member, you realize that, there's always that possibility of an insider threat. And I don't want to, alarm anybody. It's no different than if you're, and a lot of board members, you own your own business. So you know what I mean. If you're in retail, you realize that, you have to, be aware of the fact that there could be an insider threat. And sometimes the impact can be very high. If it's workplace violence, that's an extremely high impact. Maybe the likelihood's really low, but when I have seen insider attacks from a cybersecurity perspective, it is very similar to, when you find out that somebody on your team was a violent person or whatever. It's like, wow, we should have realized it, and we didn't, because it'll never happen here. It's part of the equation. We trust the people we work with, but boy, you know, we always say in vendor management that it's, those multinational vendors, our customers aren't going to blame us. They're not going to get mad at us if we have to change their credit card number because of target breach. But they will get mad at us if, if we let somebody locally breach our data. But think about it. If somebody that we hired caused injury to our customers, to me, that's black swan impact. I want to make sure you realize that the FBI has been raising concerns about the insider threat, but it's not like we're seeing breaches. Part of the problem with the insider threat, though, is they can get away with a lot without anybody knowing as well. But my problem is that as a company that watches networks, we are not watching for the insider threat as much as we could. And I feel like, nobody's really even defined a threat. And so it's good that the board maybe helps in a very nuanced and careful manner. I definitely agree that we get what we expect, and we don't want to treat our team members like they could be a threat, or, because then they think you don't trust them and everything. And so I totally get that. But it is an issue that I feel like we ought to put on the table. We're all grown-ups. And the way I like to word it is, what if me, Dan Hadaway, what if I, on the way into work this morning, snapped? I mean, what would you do about that? And so, board members have access to information. If one of you was to ask an information security officer, hey, what if I snapped? How does the bank protect against me selling information on the internet, on the dark web? I mean, what do we have in place to protect against the insider threat? So you may or may not decide to approach that, but I feel like it might be worth your while as a board member, to think about it. Again, the last three risks are the same. They've been on the list for years now. I mean, users can make mistakes. That's been on the list since about 2005. But what makes it different is that we're tired. The pandemic has us tired. All the unrest, or whatever it's called, that's going on with our culture has us a little bit fatigued. And so this is a slide that I've been using for years and years. It used to be, users may make mistakes, and then we changed it to users may still make mistakes. Now we crossed off may and put will. This statistic's been the same. I mean, it's between about 68 and 72 or 73% every year that I check the CSI FBI report. 70% of incidents are caused by user mistakes. And let's face it, our users are working from home, they're fatigued. This is still a risk. Same with vendors, they will still make mistakes. And then banks, they're continuing with their technology plans for the most part, and I don't blame them. We want to be ready when the pandemic is over, but we're also still fighting for that online banking space now. And there's a lot of new technologies that we've been waiting to deploy, and now it's time to deploy. We've been patient. We were late majority adopters. We need to continue with our technology plans. I totally get that. We just need to realize that Joe and Jane alone aren't going to be able to monitor the risk of that. All right, Joe and Jane, by the way, they're the cybersecurity superheroes that I started us off with. They too are kind of tired. All right, and so we need your help. And so that brings me to the way I want to conclude this. How can you help? Well, talk to Joe and Jane. Talk to your IT people. Ask them, are we ready for our audits? Are we providing adequate training across the board to all the stakeholders in the cybersecurity process? How are we managing those new risks? And, if you want more detail, well, audit readiness, I don't know what, I mean, you get the audit reports. I would ask your auditors, hey, was the team ready? Did it look like they were able to just turn over what they already had? Or did it look like they had to create all this stuff in a rush? From the awareness perspective, we need you to help create a culture where if an employee makes a mistake, maybe they go to a cloud site and, get hacked or whatever because of it, I don't know, that they can call their supervisor and say, hey, I think I just clicked on the link without worrying about shame or defame or whatever. We need to teach our users to disconnect from networks, our acceptable use policy. If you're a board member and you haven't already sat on a tabletop test of your cybersecurity incident response program, you might want to talk to management about that. Your technical team should still be going to technical training. It's not like the technology hasn't stopped changing. You should ask your information security officers how they're staying on top of vendor risk. It's getting almost ridiculous. It takes a lot of their time. And then remember, it's the customers that are going to get attacked more than the banks. We're hardened. It's our customers that could cause us harm because they're being attacked. And then I just went over what I feel the top 7 risks are. A community-based bank, a typical community-based bank. But I also want you to realize that the risks for your bank might be different than the list of 7 I went over. And that these questions here, they might be questions you've already asked. But if you ever want to have the one question that no matter what you do, if you ask this question, is going to make you sound smart. Let's just say you're listening to a discussion about what the information security officer is doing to help their customers understand what ransomware is and how they can protect themselves from it. Or better yet, let's get some a little bit further away from the customer. Do we ensure that our users are properly trained? Here's a good question that if you ask it, you will seem brilliant. Okay, so this user awareness training you're talking about, how does it protect our customers? By asking that question, you're actually drawing the line from user awareness training to protecting your customers. And you know what? Your information security officer is thankful that you now know it's your role to help draw that line. So thank you very much for joining me here today. Let's make it a safe as well as successful 2021. And never forget, awareness is 9/11ths of the battle.
Great information as always. Thanks, Dan, and thank you for joining us today.